I have a number of questions, and I'm going to get right to it in the nature of time. Um, so, from a timeline perspective, and correspondence and communication that I've had with, or that I've read from passengers that were on the train, so there was points in time where passengers actually felt like they were prisoners. That came from a 25-year-old passenger that was on the train. And the first question I'm going to pose is, if there was an emergency, why did it take so long to contact local authorities?
Throughout the night of the 23rd into the 24th, there was an operational disruption.
Mhm.
We continued to have contingency plans to resolve the disruption, and I'll pause there and say I'd like to apologize to the people on board our trains. I understand the experience they had, and it is not an experience we ever wish to deliver for
Okay.
Via Rail. During those operational disruption phase, we had passengers in a safe place with light and heat and access to washrooms. We couldn't access the train, or we couldn't access the train to evacuate them. It was only in the early morning when passengers, unfortunately, took it upon themselves to detrain from the train that the situation became unsafe for both those passengers and then for the on the rail infrastructure. And
Okay, so if I may, if you don't mind me interrupting, so it was after 12 hours when a local authorities, so the local emergency services were not aware of this until someone actually deboarded the train and contacted the authorities. So was there anybody contacting the local authorities? Was it via itself, or was it just the passengers that ended up connecting with local authorities?
rail police were in contact with CN police.
Okay.
And based on the assessment of the conditions in the town of Coburg, the term code black was referenced, which I'm not familiar with, but which I understand refers to a situation where emergency services will only respond to life-threatening emergencies.
Okay. So earlier in your testimony, Mr. Brinkley, you had mentioned that the train was not accessible, but just moments before that, Mrs. Toporski, if I pronounce it right, mentioned that you were less than 2-minute walk away from residential area. So I'm not sure if they correspond with each other or if they contradict each other. So if it's a stone's throw away from residential areas, that's the concern that I'm having, because there was people that were of diabetic nature, there was unsanitary bathrooms. There's a lot of concerns, and I'm grateful that you've owned them and that you're trying to acknowledge and remedy them. But from a perspective of, let me just see here, like, is there, from the Federal Ministry of Transportation, is there some kind of definition of what constitutes an emergency, and why nobody was contacted sooner?
Thank you for the question, MP Kramp-Neuman. Just to refer back to the original portion where you mentioned houses within a stone's throw, there was a subdivision nearby where there was no hydro as well, but we were on an embankment with a creek running below the embankment through a forested area to get there. Even in
Hmm.
daylight, emergency services, had to work to get into that location. We did not see it as a safe environment to attempt to detrain passengers when, in fact, they did have light and heat in an area that did not have light and heat. We could also not
Okay.
access with or any other transportation to move those unfortunate passengers somewhere else.
Okay, so maybe you could help clarify this question for me. Can I understand that they were struck by a tree, and can you speak to the damage that was had, or can you comment if there's a federal regulation for a train to move forward, either a kilometer or back, without that of a horn? Because I understand the horn fell off. So is that a regulation that you can move forward or back a minimal amount if you do not have a horn?
Yes, we could have continued operating without a horn. The issue that kept us from moving that train was the fact that the tree came to rest on the train with a significant portion of the trunk leaning against the train in the vicinity of the passenger windows. The assessment was that if we tried to move the train at that time without assistance from CN, that the tree would intrude into the passenger compartment, break the windows, open the car to the environment.